It was still early in the morning. The sun had just begun to rise, and the compound was quiet. Outside the big house with a tall, beautiful gate, a man in a wheelchair sat alone. His shirt was clean but old. His trousers were folded neatly, and his legs were thin and lifeless. In his hands he held a small walking cane, though he could not stand. His face looked calm, but his eyes held a quiet kind of strength. He lifted his hand and knocked gently on the gate. Tap, tap, tap. Inside, the gateman James heard the sound. He was sweeping the front yard. At first he ignored it. He thought it was nothing. But the knocking came again, soft but steady. Slowly he walked to the gate. "Who be this one knocking this early morning?" James muttered. He opened the small view-hole and looked out. His eyes widened when he saw the man in a wheelchair sitting. "Outside the gate, you'd a fine person?" James asked, his voice rough. The man raised his head slowly and spoke with calmness. "Good morning. I came to marry." "Marry? You say what?" "I came to marry." James blinked. He couldn't believe his ears. "Marry who?" he asked, his voice now sounding confused. "I was told that madam in this house has 3 beautiful daughters. I came to marry one of them." James threw his head back and started laughing. "So now you want marry one of madam daughters? Like this, inside wheelchair?" But the man remained calm. "Yes, please tell madam that I'm outside." James laughed again and said, "Wait for me. I come." He left the gate still laughing and shaking his head. "Wonders shall never end," he said aloud. When he got to the main house, he raised his voice. "Madam, madam, you won't believe what I just saw." Madam Stella came out, adjusting her head tie. "Why are you shouting this morning like that?" "There's one man outside. He's in a wheelchair. He said he wants to marry one of your daughters." Madam Stella stared at him. "What did you just say?" "He say he won marry. He say you get 3 beautiful daughters, and he won marry one of them." Madam Stella placed her hands on her hips. "A crippled man wants to marry my daughters?" She laughed so loud the housemaid dropped the tray she was carrying. "Let me see him with my own eyes." She walked to the gate with bold steps, opened it, and saw the man sitting there. She shook her head. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning, madam," the man replied. "Please, I came to marry one of your daughters." That was it. She burst into laughter again. "You came to do what?" "I came to marry." She laughed until she bent forward. "You want to marry one of my daughters? You that cannot walk?" She laughed so hard her eyes watered. "Precious. Sandra, Bella, come out here." Her 3 daughters came out, well-dressed, each one holding a phone. "What is it?" "Mummy," Sandra asked, "this man says he wants to marry one of you." They looked at him. Then they laughed so hard they held each other. "God forbid!" Bella shouted. Sandra clapped her hands. "Even our maid is finer than him." Madam Stella wiped her tears of laughter and said, "Don't worry, I have one girl for you. She's useless in this house. You can have her." She turned and shouted, "Grace, come here." A young girl came out slowly. Her clothes were torn and dirty. She was barefoot. Her face looked tired, and her eyes were full of sadness. "This is Grace," Madam Stella said. "She's not my real daughter. She's my husband's child from another woman. She's your wife now." The crippled man looked at Grace gently. Then he looked back at Madam Stella. "No, I cannot marry her without paying bride price. It is our tradition. I will go now and come back in 6 months. I must marry her the right way." Madam Stella and her daughters laughed louder. "6 months to beg for money? We will wait," Sandra said with a wicked smile. Grace stood there, tears in her eyes. The man nodded. "I will come back." And with slow hands, he turned his wheelchair and rolled away as they continued laughing behind him. Grace stood outside the compound long after the crippled man had gone. Her eyes followed him as he rolled away, his wheelchair wheels shaking, over the rough sand road. Her heart was heavy. She didn't know why he had chosen her or why he insisted on marrying her properly. No one had ever spoken to her with respect before, not even once. From the day her father died, everything in her life changed. Madame Stella, her stepmother, took over everything, his house, his money, his lands. Grace, just a teenager then, was turned into a maid in her father's house. Every day she cleaned, cooked, fetched water and washed clothes. She slept on the kitchen floor. She wore old clothes. Madame Stella's daughters, Precious, Sandra and Bella, mocked her every chance they got. They called her names, threw things at her and made her do their chores. And Madame Stella never stopped them. She only gave Grace one look, a look that said, "You are not one of us." That night, Grace cried quietly in the small storeroom where she slept. She kept thinking about the crippled man. Why would he want her? Was it all a trick? A joke? Or maybe he was just another person trying to laugh at her pain. The next morning, Madame Stella entered the kitchen with her girls and saw Grace washing plates. "Grace," she called out with a wicked grin, "your husband said he will come back in 6 months. Hope you're preparing for your honeymoon in the forest." The girls burst into laughter. Sandra added, "I heard he's going to beg at the motor park to gather bride price." "He even said it's tradition," Bella mocked. "Tradition in wheelchair." Grace lowered her eyes and kept scrubbing the pot. She didn't answer. Her heart was too broken for words, but deep inside her she remembered the man's eyes. He didn't laugh, he didn't mock. He looked at her like she was human, like she mattered. Weeks passed. Grace tried to forget. She focused on her work. Each day was the same. Wake early, work all day, sleep late, eat only leftovers. No one asked how she felt. No one ever called her by name with kindness. 6 months felt like 6 years. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. James the gateman came into the kitchen waving a small brown envelope. "Grace, you get letter," he shouted. Grace's hands froze. A letter? For her? She wiped her hands on her wrapper and took it gently. It was written in neat handwriting. "Dear Grace, as I promised, I will return on the 6th month. Our traditional marriage will take place on Saturday at your family compound. Please be ready. I will come for you. Yours sincerely, Matthew. Matthew." That was his name. Grace's heart beat fast. She looked at the letter again. It felt real, too real. She ran to Madame Stella to show her, but Madame Stella only laughed. "You believe this nonsense? Let me see the money and the people first. Then I'll believe." The girls joined in, mocking her again. "Your cripple is coming to carry you. Oh, hope you've washed your only wrapper." Grace stood quietly. She said nothing, but her hands held the letter tight. Inside her heart, a new feeling began to grow. It was not fear, it was not sadness. It was hope. For the first time in her life, someone chose her. The sun rose slowly that Saturday morning, casting soft golden light across the compound. Grace had barely slept. She lay awake most of the night, staring at the cracked ceiling of the storeroom, clutching the brown letter close to her chest. Her heart was beating fast. Was it really happening? Would Matthew truly return for her? By 7 a.m., the house was already buzzing, but not because of her. Madame Stella's daughters were preparing for a party. Loud music filled the air. Precious curled her hair in front of a mirror. Sandra ironed her gown, while Bella was painting her nails. Grace, still wearing her usual faded wrapper, swept the compound quietly. Her hands trembled. The others didn't take the day seriously. They were sure Matthew wouldn't show up. Madame Stella stepped out in her lace gown and gold earrings, holding a glass of juice. She looked at Grace and smirked. "So today is your wedding, eh?" she said mockingly. "Where is your crippled groom?" The girls laughed behind her. "Maybe his wheelchair broke on the way," Sandra joked. "Or maybe he fell inside gutter," Bella added, holding her stomach. Grace said nothing. She kept sweeping, her eyes full of silent tears. Suddenly a loud sound came from the gate. "Vroom!" Everyone froze. Another loud engine followed. Then another. James the gateman ran from his post. "Madam! Madam! Big cars, they enter, oh!" Stella frowned. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the sound of tires crushing gravel filled the air. One after the other, 3 black luxury cars drove into the compound. They were long, shiny, and very expensive. One had tinted windows. The others had plates that said Matthew Group Holdings. The girls dropped their makeup brushes. Stella's glass of juice slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. "Who are these people?" she asked, stepping back. From the biggest car, the door opened slowly, and out stepped a tall man in a well-fitted blue suit. He walked with confidence. His skin glowed, his face was smooth, his shoes shined like mirrors. Madame Stella gasped, "Wait, is that—" Yes, it was him, Matthew, but he was not crippled. No wheelchair, no cane, no help. He stood tall and proud like a king. Grace stood, frozen. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Matthew walked past everyone until he stood in front of her. "Hello, Grace," he said gently. "I came back, just like I promised." She stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. You can walk?" He nodded. "Yes, I only pretended to be crippled because I wanted to see who truly had a good heart." Then he turned to Madame Stella, who was still speechless. "I know this may shock you," he said calmly, "but I am the son of Mr. Rowland, the man who used to be your late husband's business partner. They were best friends, and before they died, they made a promise that their children would one day marry each other." Stella's mouth opened, but no sound came. "You didn't know who I was. You mocked me. You gave me Grace like a rag. But today I came back for her. I came back to honor both her and my father." He turned to Grace again. "And now, I ask once more, may I marry you properly, with pride and respect?" Tears ran down Grace's cheeks. Her hands shook, but this time they were not tears. Of pain, she nodded slowly. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Everything stood still. Grace could hardly breathe. The man who once sat in a broken wheelchair was now standing tall before her, dressed in power, speaking with dignity. Her tears flowed freely as the man she thought was a beggar now stood as her savior. Madame Stella couldn't move. Her mouth remained open, her feet frozen to the ground. Precious. Sandra and Bella stared in disbelief, their hands covering their mouths. They had never felt this kind of shame before. The man they had mocked, insulted, laughed at was now the very man who owned the kind of life they all dreamed of marrying into. Matthew turned around and looked at them. "I didn't come here to disgrace anyone," he said calmly, "but I wanted to know what kind of heart lived inside this house." He turned to Madame Stella. "My father, Mr. Rowland, and your husband were not just business partners, they were like brothers. Before they died, they made a promise their children would marry. My father believed in that promise, and so did I." Stella's voice finally returned. Why didn't you tell us?" "I didn't want to be accepted because of wealth," Matthew said. "I wanted to know who would choose me, not for money, not for name, but for kindness." He faced Grace. "Out of everyone in this house, only one person treated me with quiet respect, even when you were being mocked, even when you were handed over like trash. You did not curse, you did not run. You stood in silence, and you cried, but you didn't turn your pain into hate. That strength is what I admire most in you." Grace covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold her sobs. Her heart had never known this kind of joy, this kind of honor. All her life, she was made to feel like she didn't belong, but now, standing in front of everyone, she was the one being chosen. Matthew stretched his hand to her. "Grace, will you enter a new life with me? A life where you will be loved, respected, and cherished, not hidden like a servant?" Grace didn't speak. She just stepped forward and fell into his arms. Her tears touched his suit, and he held her tight like something priceless. Behind them, Madame Stella tried to force a laugh. "Well, it's all good. Everything has worked out fine. What matters is that she's getting married now, and we're happy for her." But no one was listening. "Matthew," turned to his men. "Let's go." They opened the car door for Grace. She turned once more, looking at the house where she had suffered. Her eyes met Madame Stella's, then the girls'. None of them could look back. For the first time she saw fear and regret in their faces. She didn't speak to them. She entered the car, and as the door closed behind her, silence filled the compound. The girl they threw away had become the jewel in the hand of royalty, and she was never coming back the same. The ride from the compound was silent at first. Grace sat beside Matthew in the back seat of the luxurious car. Her eyes were fixed on the road, but her mind was flooded with memories. She saw herself sweeping in the rain, scrubbing pots with bruised hands, eating leftovers while others laughed. Over full plates. She remembered all the nights she cried alone, wondering if anyone in the world would ever love her. But now, everything had changed. Matthew held her hand gently. "Are you all right?" She looked at him and smiled faintly. "I still feel like I'm dreaming." "It's not a dream," he said. "This is your life now, a new one." They arrived at a beautiful house in the city. It wasn't just big, it was graceful. The gate opened before them and flowers lined the driveway. Housemaids and workers stood in two lines, bowing respectfully as Grace stepped out. "This is your home now," Matthew said. She covered her mouth. Her heart beat fast. Everything looked like a fairy tale. For a girl who was once treated like dirt, this was more than a miracle. It was a resurrection. Inside the house, Matthew showed her everything. "You'll have your own room, your own space, your own car, anything you want. I don't even know how to say thank you," Grace whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Matthew said. "You deserve this, and more." That night he arranged a small traditional gathering, not with noise and crowds, but with honor. His family elders came, carrying gifts. There was food, music, and culture. For the first time, Grace sat in front of elders, not as a maid, but as a bride. They poured blessings upon her. She was dressed in fine traditional lace, her hair adorned with beads, her skin glowing from care and peace. After the ceremony, Matthew stood before everyone. "I want the world to know," he said, "that this woman is not just my wife. She is my destiny. I went in search of someone with a beautiful soul. I found her." Grace bowed her head, tears falling quietly. One of the elders, an old woman with kind eyes, touched Grace's chin. "My daughter," she said softly, "suffering builds queens. You are one now. Wear your crown." The room clapped. Grace smiled through her tears. Later that night she sat by the window staring at the moon. Matthew walked in and placed a soft shawl on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am," she said, "but a small part of me still feels pain." "That's because you're human," Matthew said. "But don't carry that pain forever. Let your joy become louder than your sorrow." Grace nodded slowly. "I just wish my father was alive to see this day." Matthew held her hand. Think, he's smiling down at you now." In that moment, the girl who was once mocked, beaten, and used, now sat in peace beside a man who saw her worth before the world did, and the gate that once opened to mockery had now opened to honor. 3 weeks passed. In those short weeks, Grace's life turned from misery to honor. She was no longer wearing torn wrappers or scrubbing floors. She was now addressed as Madame Grace. People who once looked down on her now bowed when she passed. And every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't just see beauty, she saw healing, strength, and a woman who rose from nothing. But far away in that compound where she once suffered, silence had replaced laughter. Madame Stella sat on the same veranda where she mocked Grace. This time, her legs were shaking. Precious, Sandra, and Bella no longer had smiles on their faces. They sat quietly, phones in their hands, scrolling through pictures on social media. There she was, Grace, smiling beside Matthew in a grand hall, wearing royal clothes, standing before politicians, celebrities, and powerful business people. Stella slapped her chest. So this girl, this Grace we gave away like rag, is now a billionaire's wife, Sandra whispered. Mummy, we made a terrible mistake. No, Bella shouted. You made the mistake. You're the one that told us to laugh at him. Me? Stella turned to her, angry. You all mocked him, all of you. They began to argue, blame flying from one to another. But the truth was clear. They had thrown away a treasure because it looked dirty, and now the whole world was watching their shame. The next morning, a black SUV stopped at their gate. Everyone rushed out, thinking maybe Matthew had sent gifts. But it wasn't for them. The driver handed James an envelope. It was an invitation. It read, "The housewarming ceremony of Mr. and Mrs. Matthew Rowland." And the launch of Grace Care Foundation for Abused Girls venue, Grace Mansion, Lagos State. They stared at the name of the mansion, Grace Mansion. The girl they pushed away had built something with her name, something they could never enter. On the day of the event, Madame Stella dressed up and forced her daughters into native attire. "We'll just go and show face," she said. "Maybe she'll forgive." But when they arrived, they were stopped at the gate. "Sorry," the guard said, "only those with valid RSVP passes are allowed in." "I'm her stepmother," Stella shouted. "I raised her." The guard looked at her from head to toe and said, "She left strict instructions. You're not welcome." Sandra burst into tears. Bella walked back to the car. Precious stood frozen in shame. Inside the mansion, Grace stood beside Matthew, greeting guests with a gentle smile. Her face glowed. Her dress flowed behind her like royalty. One of the guests asked, "Is it true that you used to be a maid?" Grace smiled. "Yes, but pain doesn't last forever." Later that night, she stood at the balcony and looked out into the city lights. Matthew came and wrapped his arms around her. "Your past doesn't define you," he whispered. She nodded. "I know, because now I've written a new story." Weeks passed after the launch of the Grace Care Foundation. Newspapers carried headlines like, "From Maid to Millionaire, Grace Rowland's Quiet Rise to Power." She was treated like a servant. Now she employs hundreds. Matthew Rowland and his mysterious bride, Grace, a love story born from pain everywhere. Grace went. People stood to greet her. Young girls looked up to her. Women wanted to hear her speak, but she stayed quiet, humble, and kind. Not once did she show off her wealth. Not once did she mention the name of those who threw her away. But life had a way of teaching lessons. One rainy evening, while Grace was reading in the mansion's study room, a knock came at the gate. One of the guards walked in. "Madam, there's someone outside, a woman, and 3 girls." Grace closed her book slowly. "Who is it?" "She says her name is Madame Stella." The room went quiet. Grace stood up. "Let them wait, I'll come to them." She walked slowly through the house, her gown brushing the floor. Her shoes tapped softly as she moved with grace. When she reached the entrance, she paused at the door and looked out. There they were, Madame Stella, drenched in rain, her makeup washed off, her wrapper soaked. Behind her stood her 3 daughters, no longer dressed in luxury, no longer laughing. Their eyes were swollen from crying. Grace stepped outside. The wind blew gently as she looked at the same people who once looked down on her. Madame Stella fell to her knees. "Grace, my daughter, please forgive me. I didn't know. I was blinded. I let pride rule my heart. The daughters knelt too." "We were wrong," Precious said. "We mocked what we didn't understand," Sandra added. "Please, give us another chance," Bella whispered. Grace looked at them. Her heart was quiet, calm. For a moment she remembered everything, the beatings, the names, the hunger, the silence. She took a deep breath. "I am not your daughter," she said softly. "You made it clear I never was." They began to weep. Grace continued. "If you came for money, I'm sorry. I don't owe you anything. If you came for mercy, I gave it to myself long ago." "But please," Stella cried. Grace raised her hand. "Enough," she turned to the guard. "Give them food and water. Then let them go. Don't let them stay." Then she walked back inside, wiping a tear from her eye, not because she was sad, but because she finally said what needed to be said. That night, she sat by the window again, Matthew beside her. "You were strong," he said. She nodded. "I didn't speak to hurt them, I just spoke the truth." And as the rain continued to fall, Grace felt light, like a woman who had finally closed a painful door. Months passed. The world now knew Grace not as a girl who was mocked, but as a woman of purpose. Her foundation helped orphaned girls, street hawkers, and mistreated housemaids. She visited villages offering scholarships and safe homes. People who had never been heard before now had a voice through her. But Grace didn't do it to prove anything. She didn't do it to show off. She did it because she knew what it felt like to be forgotten. One morning, she stood in the mirror wearing a white gown. It was her church wedding day. Matthew stepped in, dressed in a clean suit. He smiled at her. "You look like a dream." She turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you for choosing me, when I was just a shadow in a broken house." He walked over and kissed her forehead. "You were never a shadow. You were just covered in dust. Now the world sees your light." The wedding was grand but peaceful. Celebrities came. Businessmen, politicians, orphaned children lined the walkway, tossing petals. Grace walked in with quiet beauty. Her head high, her heart healed. After the wedding, while giving her speech, she stood on stage and held the microphone. "I want to thank everyone here," she said. "But today is not about glamour or wealth, it's about hope." The room went silent. "I was once called a maid, unwanted, dirty, and weak. But someone came into my life and treated me with honor. That small act gave me the courage to become who I am today." She paused and smiled. "Sometimes the ones the world throws away are the ones sent to build it. My name is Grace. And now, I carry that name with pride." The hall erupted in applause. Matthew stood, clapping with tears in his eyes. Later that night, as they drove home from the wedding, Grace looked out the window and whispered, "God, I don't know why you chose to lift me, but I will never forget where I came from." And in the quiet of that moment, Grace knew she was not just a wife or a rich woman. She was a symbol, a testimony, a name that rose from pain and wore honor like a crown. Her name was Grace, and the world would never forget it. Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed our stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.